Hello and welcome to Thursday Night Live. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning in today. So I have a very interesting topic that's kind of, on the side of what I normally talk about, but I've been so excited. So I've been working on this article for the last couple of weeks, and it just keeps taking twists and turns, and there have been a number of things that have come up in the researching that have shocked me. I like shock. I mean, it took me off guard. And I'm going to preface whatever I say with this statement. Everything that I'm going to talk about comes from the mainstream narrative. And so if you look up any of this information, this is not a conspiracy theory. It is not from alternative sources. This is right from the horse's mouth. And I'm making this disclaimer because I'm going to be talking about COVID and COVID vaccines. And it is my hope that YouTube does not take me down because there is not anything that I am saying that cannot be confirmed through mainstream sources. So here we go. And I'm going to do this in a kind of like a, did you know? Because there is a lot of stuff in here that I was just like, really? Huh? And the reason this whole thing came up was that I saw something and it gave a data statistic that said 14.4 million Americans averted dying because they had taken the vaccine, which I needed to find out what they were talking about. And that sent me down this giant rabbit hole. And now I have a 14-page document that I'm going to share just some of the highlights out of it. This should be released in the next week or so. And so it will be available on my webpage, soulhealer.com, or on my Substack account, which is Dr. Rita Louise on Substack, which I really hope you would subscribe to because I am posting information and articles and memes and cool stuff on there all of the time. Okay. So, when we think of the COVID pandemic, it really had a profound influence on everyone around the world. And so the very first case of COVID was detected cases were detected at the end of November and the beginning of December in 2019. And so what they tried to do, so they thought that the people had pneumonia or something like that. So they treated these individuals for pneumonia, but the treatments they were using just weren't working. And so one of the things they saw also was that it was spreading really fast and it created some concern. And so they decided to go and run the genetic sequence of the virus, and they determined that it wasn't a virus, and actually it resembled SARS-CoV-1, which was around in 2003. And so they shared the results of this genetic sequencing with the world. But by the time they had done that, the cases in China had risen dramatically. And they went and by the end of the month, by the end of January, they locked down the country. But in the meantime, okay, so here's the timeline. So they released their genetic sequence on, all right, hang on. This had so many dates that all ran into each other on January 10th. And so between January 10th and January 16th, they designed specific primers for use in the PCR test. They produced the necessary reagents. They established testing protocols. They were able to confirm that the newly created primers specifically targeted the SARS-CoV-2 virus. They tested the assays on suspected cases, and they rolled out the newly developed PCR test for use. So from start to finish, we're talking about 6 days. 6 days. And we talk about warp speed. That was warp speed. And so again, so that was January 16th. And by the January 23rd, there were over 2,000 cases confirmed. And again, China locked down their country. So as far as treatment, so early they used things like oxygen therapy, antibiotics, antivirals, steroids, IV fluids to treat the individuals because, again, they thought they had a pneumonia. But once they discovered that it wasn't pneumonia and the SARS-CoV-2, they realized that they had to do something different. And so it was determined that they would do testing for some other kind of therapeutic to use for this disease, this illness. And so they got over 100 countries involved: France, Spain, Italy, United Kingdom, China, Thailand, South Africa, Egypt, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, and the United States. And they did initial trials of 4 drugs, okay? So they have all these countries and they tested 4 drugs: remdesivir, leponavir, ritonavir, or something, which had been used. That was another HIV drug that had been used during the SARS-CoV-1 breakout with some modicum of success. Hydrochloroquine and interferon beta 1A. And so in the United States, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, NIAID, funded the adaptive COVID-19 treatment trials. And so these were run by Anthony Fauci. And so it was broken up into 4 parts. And so what they tested, the first part was they tested remdesivir against a placebo. The second part, they tested remdesivir against this baricitinib something. I'm sorry, I have no phonics skills. And remdesivir. So remdesivir plus this thing versus just remdesivir. Then in the third part, they tested remdesivir plus interferon against remdesivir again alone. And then in the fourth one, they tested remdesivir plus that one and remdesivir plus dexamethasone. And that's all they tested. It was remdesivir plus this, remdesivir plus that, remdesivir plus this. And so what they found was remdesivir reduced hospital recovery times in patients from 15 to 10 days, but the mortality rate was still high. The other ones weren't as good. And so, and actually the remdesivir plus that thing actually had less people die than just the remdesivir alone. But so in that test, they had 26 people die, where in the remdesivir alone, they had 40 people die. But that was considered not statistically big enough to say, okay, this is a better solution. The last 2, they felt didn't really work very good. So at the end of these tests, Anthony Fauci said that there was clear-cut evidence that remdesivir was effective in reducing recovery time. Now, here's a little bit of the catch with this. At the time that they are running these tests, remdesivir was still an investigational drug and was still under clinical development. So it had never been released and approved by the FDA. And it was used in 2014 as a test material during the Ebola outbreak in Africa. And they found out that it was less than 50% effective compared to 30 to 35% effective of the other drugs that were used. So the FDA didn't approve it for the Ebola issue, but they gave it emergency authorization use for COVID, even though it had never been released. And so because of that, remdesivir became the gold standard of treatment in hospitalizations. Interesting. Oh, and then here's another little snippet. Down the road, the World Health Organization did a study on remdesivir, and they came to the conclusion that they didn't feel that it reduced mortality, hospitalization duration, or need for ventilations. And so the World Health Organization started recommending against its use. But that's just the beginning. I mean, that was the first, like, really? Really? You have all these countries and you test like one thing? I don't know. But at the same time, okay, so did you know that around the same time that the Act 2, so the second phase of the trials were beginning, they did an investigation into therapeutics like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, elderberry, echinacea. And the studies weren't designed to find a cure, but to help offer like supportive benefits in reducing the severity of a COVID case, or preventing it from getting worse. And so the public became very excited about this possibility. But if you think about it, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, echinacea, and elderberry are recommended. This is the part that kills me. They're recommended by the CDC and the NIH to take during cold and flu season. So it's getting to be winter, and they recommend that you take these things as a preventative. However, when it came to COVID, they said that that there wasn't enough evidence to support the use of these products for COVID. And they never even made the recommendation, even though they knew these supplements were safe for people to take and they weren't going to create any kind of adverse event. They didn't even recommend like that you should just take them, and if they work, they work, and if they don't work, they don't work. And it was just mute. It was just silent around the whole topic of that. Okay. So did you know, and let's see, what do I want to pull out with this? Okay, so in the United States, the primary vaccines that were available were the mRNA vaccine or a vector viral vaccine or the DNA-based vaccine. And in the early development of these products, they faced a bunch of challenges, including like stability issues, like the vaccine would degrade really quickly if it wasn't like kept super cold. It didn't have good cell penetration. Sometimes it created a very strong reaction in the body, and other stuff. And there were other issues. And the testing started in 2019 for the use of these products. And so over the years, so between 2019, well, I mean, I guess that really wasn't all that long, because COVID, well, that's interesting. I just caught that now, because COVID started the end of 2019. See, they kill me because they say, oh, well, we've tested it. It's had like long testing done on this stuff. However, any product that was made based on these technologies went through phase 1, which is animal testing, and perhaps phase 2, which is limited human testing, but none of them had ever gone through phase 3, which is a large human sample of X number, until we got to COVID-19, where they actually ran it through phase 3 trials. But the phase 3 trials, did you know, were really kind of interesting. Okay, so the trials were supposed to last for 3 months each, which they didn't. I mean, they started the trial, but then like the next month, they started phase 2, and then phase 3 started right on the heels of that. But the phase 3 trial had 43,000 participants and was supposed to last for 6 months. And these individuals were supposed to be monitored periodically and then evaluated at the end of the period. And this was the sad part. And most of the individuals they used as the testing people came from low to middle income countries, like South America and Africa. And so they were supposed to do a follow-up evaluation of individuals who were tested after the 2-month period, which they did. Now, at the exact same time, the FDA released its requirements to receive an emergency use authorization. Now, imagine this, but Pfizer, who is the study I'm talking about in particular, released their report, and the very next day, because they released their report, the FDA released their requirements, and the very next day, they got their emergency use authorization. All data that's available online. I am not saying anything that is not 100% factual. I ran this article through AI to have it fact check me, and it all came up factual. So, because I did not want to provide anything that was not 100% according to what they had to say. So this was kind of interesting. So this was the trial. So the Pfizer trial was made up of 36 plus participants. 18,000, I'm just rounding numbers, received the vaccine, and 18,000 received the placebo. At the end of the window, 170 confirmed COVID cases were reported, 8 from the vaccine group and 162 from the placebo. That's pretty good. And so this data allowed them to claim a 95% efficacy rating. Okay, so this is after 2 months after receiving the vaccine. 1 severe case was reported in the placebo group, and no severe cases in the vaccine group. So this allowed them to claim that the vaccine was 100% effective in reducing severe cases. And that's what they ran with. And so even though they ran a second report at the end of the 6 months, it's like the deal was already done. Well, actually, the deal wasn't quite already done. Here's another, did you know? So high-income nations like the UK and EU all got massive early purchasing agreements to buy up and reserve millions of doses of the vaccine. Where it gets a little interesting is that all of these agreements were done in the middle of April, and the emergency authorization didn't come through until October. So they were betting, they like signed on the line for a product that wasn't even tested. I mean, it wasn't based on technology that was already in use, and it wasn't really tested, but they spent billions of dollars in advance to buy up doses. Okay, here's another did you know? So you watch the news and you listen to things and you wonder, or you assume that the mRNA and the DNA type vaccines were the only ones that were available. That was it. Everything was this new technology. However, in China, they made a vaccine that was based on inactive viruses. And so that technology has been around for 100 years. And so that's how they make the polio vaccine. That's how they make the hepatitis vaccine. and a number of other vaccines that are in common use even today. But where it gets interesting is that one of the reasons that, and I'm not quite sure if they actually said this out loud, but I'm just going to say this out loud, so don't censor me on this, was that in the West, we did not have, so in order to do this, they had to grow actual COVID vaccine, and then they kill it, and then they take the dead vaccine or dead virus and make the vaccine out of that. Well, the United States and in the West, we didn't have the capabilities of doing that. I mean, it's not that we couldn't do it, but we didn't have plants and facilities large enough to produce massive amounts of this vaccine style. But where did they have those that capacity? Russia, China, and India. Okay. All right, I'm talking a lot, so let's just see. Oh, okay. This was a really interesting one. Okay, so the first vaccine, and again, a lot of dates. So the first vaccines were distributed in December, the beginning of December of 2020. Just 2 weeks after the first distribution of vaccines, the first documented breakthrough case occurred. 2 weeks. And so, by then, because of that, the narrative really had to change. And I thought I had a number here. And so hang on one second. Okay, so that was December. So by April, there had been 10,262 breakthrough infections recorded. 10,000, so anyway. And so as they came to realize that there were some issues with the vaccine and the immunity was waning, and it wasn't protecting people against like the Delta variation or Omicron, and it definitely was not preventing transmission. They started getting people, pushing people into taking the booster. But people were feeling a little kind of ripped off. It was kind of like, take the vaccine, you're one and done, you're safe, you're not going to get it, you're not going to give it to anybody. But that turned out to not be the case. And so now they're pushing the boosters, but people were wary about taking them, and, were they wasting their time in the first place? So what do you do when public sentiment goes against you? You impose a vaccine mandate. And that's when the vaccine mandate came into effect, where government employees had to take the vaccine. Health workers had to take the vaccine. And then many companies, as terms of employment, also required their employees to be vaccinated. But did you also know that businesses got sucked into the whole vaccine passport thing? So for businesses, they were presented with a clear choice. They could operate their business at 50% capacity, which is what they were doing before, or they can require proof of vaccination, and they could go back up to 100% capacity. And so for a business, a vaccine passport was a matter of survival. So, I'm not going to talk about that. So in the end, it is estimated that every American contracted COVID 1.5 to 2.5 times, whether you were vaccinated or not. It's estimated that 1.2 million people died in the U.S. from COVID, and about 100,000 of those deaths came from breakthrough cases alone. I mean, that's a pretty high number. there's a lot more detail in this article, and I know I've talked for a really long time, but I've been so excited about this that I had to share it with you. And YouTube still loved me for saying all this stuff. Anyway, so again, if you are interested in finding, reading this information, in the next week or so, go to my webpage, soulhealer.com, or go to my Substack account, Dr. Rita Louise on Substack, because that's where this article will be posted. And I've been doing a lot of articles, like deep dive investigations into health and healthcare. And so I highly recommend you go check it out. And if you need a reading or need some guidance or insights or just somebody to talk to, reach out to me and set up a time for a private consultation. And if you're listening to the show and you're digging the groove and you want to tune in and stay for the second part where I actually start doing the on-air psychic readings, go to my YouTube page. That's Just Energy Radio on YouTube. That's Just Energy Radio on YouTube. And like and subscribe to the channel. And even you people that are here, like and subscribe to the channel, set up the notifications. And I would just really, 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 really appreciate it. Okay. And again, don't forget to follow me on social media. So there's YouTube, there's my Substack, Twitter, and Rumble. Follow me, like me, whatever you have to do on those different platforms. I would just really appreciate the support.